there.
Hello there. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing good.
Great,
So,
great.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, all that stuff, right?
All of it.
Everything
Hello,
is
everyone.
Yeah.
Great to have you join us today. We're excited. I'm certainly excited for Jeff to go into the 2026 outlook. I know it is jam-packed. How could it not be, right?
It's going to be a pretty intense year from what I see. A lot of change.
Yeah. Some good, some challenging, right? And all depending on one's chart, but universally, some good, some challenging.
Well, this is a time, I think, of a reality shift like we've never seen before. Ever. It's absolutely huge, I think, from everything I can see. And I'll get into that by explaining it with the astrology very soon here. I'll get some powerful changes and cycles coming in.
Yeah, well, we're here to experience it. We're ready for it. So
there you go.
Let's jump in.
All right. Well, thanks, Ella, and we'll see you later.
See you later.
Okay, bye. So, yes, I got to tell you, this is a powerful, powerful year, and I'll tell you why, and everybody's been talking about it. It's the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and that actually happens in February. But before we get to February, we've got January coming up. Of course, the first of the year, everybody's always celebrating on the first of the year. I always personally said, okay, I feel it. It's psychically there, and everybody goes out and does whatever they do on the first of the year and blows off all kinds of firecrackers and guns. But personally, I always felt more energetically the first of the year was the spring equinox. That's the springtime. And that was what the ancients looked at, in terms of the first of the year. But nonetheless, I honor the Gregorian calendar. We're all on it, right? Globally, pretty much. So it's really a powerful time psychically when everybody celebrates that first of the year. And of course, they set all their new resolutions. Well, that brings me into what's going on. And I can tell you, we have an alignment that's kicking in here in January that's exceedingly powerful. This is the alignment that's actually happening right between the about the 8th and the 9th. Now, we got a new moon on the 3rd, and you can see here where I'm circling at the top of the screen. This is all these planets lined up in an arc. And notice the only one that's not in that arc, really, is Jupiter. Now, Uranus is right here. And this puts a very powerful energy. Anytime you get groupings of planets, whether they're in one sign or going over like this is, about 3 signs, it always puts a heavy gravitational pull on the Earth. So a lot of people have been mentioning earthquakes. I do think weather and earthquake both are probably going to be stirred up over this. And, there's been predictions California's going to slide into the ocean. I hope I'm right in my analysis, because if I'm not, like I said, this might be my last podcast, right? If that ever happens. February 18th, someone had predicted that they saw California and the West Coast just gone. I cast an interrogation. I get that's not going to happen, but I do get we could get shakers here as well as other places, particularly in the Pacific Northwest and over in the Asiatic and Russian area of the Pacific. That I get real strong. We could see them anywhere on the planet, actually. And it's interesting because no one can 100% predict it, because what happens is it depends on the weakness of the crust, where it's at, and where the tensions are. But when you get astronomical alignments like this, stuff like this can happen, and you can see this on the screen. It's pretty well aligned. So the other thing is, the other major thing that we have going on here is the Neptune-Saturn conjunction. And everyone's been talking about this. And that's what I had on the thumbnail here. And what does that mean? That means reality, or the perception of reality that we have, is changing. And, it's going to affect everybody individually, depending on where it is in your birth chart. But I can tell you, Saturn always rules structures. And I made some notes here about this, because this is kind of an interesting thing that parallels our lower perception of reality and consciousness, which is a big deal, because I believe consciousness is superior to astrology as long as we understand that astrology is strong. So looking at the two in concert, I think is a very powerful way to approach it. And by the way, I'm going to talk a little bit in a while about one of my more favorite psychiatrists, which is Dr. Carl Jung, who spent a great deal of time in this book, Synchronicity, and many others, talking about statistical analysis on astrology, consciousness, and the way we react. Well, this relates to what's coming up here in February. And I love using this analogy because Saturn is always the structures that we depend on and also rules karma in Vedic astrology. But Neptune is a very elusive planet. It often is a portal to other reality perceptions, or you could say perceptions of reality. And I have to say, I have a diagram here that I put together that I think is really useful in terms of analyzing this. And I'm going to go back to sharing my screen one more time. Now, I apologize for the crudeness of this diagram over here. And what this is the analogy on the tree of life. Now, I penciled this in. I'm actually going to do this diagram in a really good graphics program. I just didn't have time to get it done. But I love this because, remember, dad puts the seed in mom's womb. Farmer puts the seed in the ground, and then a garment is prepared for the soul, and spirit becomes manifest. Well, if you look over here, this is the same thing, and it's very hard to see because the graphics didn't pick up very well in the photograph that I took. But this is, the nefesh is known as the lower conscious mind. Well, if we look up here, you can see here's Neptune, and this is why I brought this diagram up. Neptune is like a portal between the other reality structures or the upper layers of the soul, if you will, and our perception of reality in this time-space world, if you will, which is what we call our lives, right? So here's what's interesting, is Saturn, notice right there, always rules structures, and it also rules the collective, if you will, karmic energies that we have believed to collect through different lifetimes. And what's so interesting is when Saturn and Neptune come together, it often makes feelings of doom and gloom. And often people tend to feel, this has been my observation too, in birth charts, when you have transiting Saturn or transiting Neptune conjuncting your Saturn, it could be either way, right? We feel like things are worse than they really are. Now, if you look at the world right now, it's a pretty dangerous place. I mean, first off, we've got all this stuff going on with Venezuela. We also have this stuff going on with Iran now, declaring war against not only the United States, but Europe and against all the Western nations, if you will. This is a very dangerous situation, not because Iran has the power. I mean, if you listen to the news, they'll say, well, Iran doesn't have any military power. It doesn't. But what it does have is the power of what it's fanned out throughout the world. There's a lot of people who will stand with Iran. This could invoke terrorism and terrorist cells that are all over the place. And I don't want to get into religions and stuff like that. But this is the kind of stuff that is very dangerous with Saturn and Neptune, because again, there's a lot of reasons why we should be concerned. I mean, look at Russia and Ukraine. Again, look at Israel and Gaza and Iran. And of course, China now is backing Russia with satellite intelligence and so on and so forth to keep the war going. And I've been mentioning, we've got Uranus going over the Pleiades. And that's something I've been talking about for months. Uranus does this about every 84 to 86 years. Well, remember, Uranus is going to go direct right here. I believe it's in February. I wrote it down here, but I got it over here somewhere. But yeah, Uranus is going to go direct February 3rd. So what does that mean? Well, then it starts heading deeper into the Pleiades, and it's going to go over this fixed star, or we could just say the very powerful star called Alcyon. And I've mentioned this many times. Alcyon was believed by many of the ancients to have a real central power with consciousness, etc. And every time this happens, we see the world get nuts. And I've said the last time before this was World War II. Before that was the Civil War. Before that in the United States, of course, was the Revolutionary War. But you can go back and look in history. There were other wars going on in Europe at the same time. Very violent stuff. And if we keep leapfrogging back every 84 to 86 years, you will find there was tumultuous stuff and rebellions and rising ups of different countries against, tyranny and so on and so forth. So, and Uranus did not have to be discovered for it to have an effect. You see, that's like the physicist said, if the tree falls in the wood, nobody's there to hear it. Did it happen? Well, of course it did. We just didn't experience it. But this is where consciousness really comes into play, because this Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the tropical zodiac hasn't joined in this specific degree for what I get is about 9,000 years. And what's interesting about this, a lot of people are staunch sidereal astrologers. That's, I will say, the more accurate zodiac in terms of the placement of the stars. But tropical astrology is more accurate in placement to the earth and the experience. And that's where the rubber hits the road, because we ain't living on the sun, we're living on earth. So the two layers are very, very powerful. In my observation on mundane things happening in the world, always I've seen the tropical to actually be the most accurate. For instance, 9/11, just to go back a little bit, Nixon taking us off the gold standard. I went back and looked even at, when the Federal Reserve Act was rubber stamped by Wilson. I mean, you can go on and on. COVID happened. You could have set your watch to COVID happening in the tropical conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. So again, the sidereal Saturn Pluto happened in the fall of 2019. But yet the alarm bell did not get kicked, and it didn't really happen until the tropical conjunction. So this is a tropical conjunction, and it's also happening in the sidereal zodiac too. But it's happening in what we call the first Egyptian bound. See, the Egyptians would divide each sign, just like the Vedas did, into different increments. Well, these are called the 5 uneven bounds. You can look it up if you look at traditional, ancient Chaldean, Egyptian, or Greek astrology. It's known as classical or traditional astrology. And I got to tell you, it's accurate. They're both accurate, Vedic astrology and these systems. So where am I going with this? Well, this conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which happens about every 35 to 36 years approximately. So it's not an uncommon occurrence. What is uncommon is it's happening in the very first Egyptian bound, almost the very first degree, actually, which is quite profound, of Aries. And many of the ancient astrologers, thousands of years ago, paid a lot of attention to when major planets conjoined in the very first degree of Aries, in the tropical zodiac. In fact, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions only happen in the very first degree of Aries about every 1,000 years. It's about 900 something odd years. But you got to remember, Earth years aren't the same as synodic cycles of planets. We kind of made our own calendars here, right? That's why many religions use a sol lunar calendar, which might actually be more accurate. Anyways, to get back to the point here of where I'm going. So what we've got here is, I think, a reality change. And I think we're going to see some pretty serious stuff happen. And here's why. And this is something I've noticed nobody else has brought up. And I check out a lot of other astrologers. We have a Kala Sarpa Yoga happening right after this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. In fact, it's forming almost when it happens. You give or take a day or two. In fact, here, I will jump back on the screen, and I'm going to show you that. You got to kind of bend your mind around a little bit here because these are different types of charts that I'm showing. But again, just as a reference, Earth is in the middle. So we're looking out from our perspective. This is geocentric astrology. Well, here's what's interesting. If you notice, this is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction right here. And you can see this is right February 20th of 2026, coming right up here, just just about 2 months away. So here's the point. Right after that, you're going to see that Mars jumps into the sidereal sign of Aquarius. And you might say, okay, great, Jeff. So what does that mean? Well, there's different definitions of what astrologers call a Kalasarpa yoga. And I know I'll get corrections from somebody on this, but a Kalasarpa yoga is not necessarily in all the ancient classical texts. And there's a lot of ambiguity of where it came from. But what it means is all the planets are in between the moon's nodes, the eclipse points. And you can see right there, I just forwarded with a time tool to February 23rd. Now, if you look here, that's the moon's south node. This is the moon's north node. And you can zoom in on this if you're on a phone or on a big screen. But all the planets now are on this side or with the nodes. Now, different astrologers say, well, it's not got to be in between the nodes, not with the nodes. But I have found when it's with the nodes, it counts. And it brings powerful, powerful changes in the world. Good example, somebody might say, well, give me an example. Well, COVID. When we had COVID-19, not only do we have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, we also had Kalasarpa yoga. And it's broken by the moon every 2 weeks. Now, for people who are more used to other types of astrology, I'll show it to you again in another situation here. Watch, if we come along here and we put this chart up, you'll see, and I can do the same thing here. It's going to be a little bit hard for people to see on a small screen, but way up here at the far right, that's what we call a time tool on this program. I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once, right? So, and astrology is really about time. It's astronomy is really what it is. Well, watch, you'll see here as I keep going, Mars will jump in the, this is a tropical zodiac, but you will see that it jumps in right there, even in the tropical system, where all the planets are on this side of the eclipse points, except one, Pluto. And you're going to notice the moon will break it every 2 weeks. See, a Kalasarpa yoga can't stay consistent because the moon goes around the Earth, again, once every month. So that's why we get the new moons, the quarters, the fulls, and the 3/4, and of course, the new again. So the moon will break any Kalasarpa yoga every 2 weeks. And many people are born with this. They say maybe 15 to 20% of the people, I don't know what the exact percentages are, but it's not a high percentage. And it's actually an accelerated karmic time of change. Now, I know there's a lot of information, but back it up for a minute and let's just look at, we have a once in probably 9,000 year conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which is a combination of reality, doom and gloom, combined with a Kalasarpa yoga. And I have found throughout history that major events always happen on outer planet conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. They just do. It's the way it is. And when you combine that with a Kalasarpa yoga, we're going to see some serious stuff. And look what we got brewing in the world. We could see a lot of volatility in the markets. Look at silver right now. I heard it just closed close to $80, or it was bouncing up over 80 and down, right around the $80 mark. And I think it's got the potential to go to $200 an ounce. That's rumors I've heard, and I've actually kind of corroborated that. Eventually, it's going to go up. And I think gold's going up too. So is platinum. And rare earth metals are definitely a place to look at. So we're going to see the financial structures of our reality. And I also think we could see some very volatile and angry responses throughout the world to what's happening right now. And this gets back into what I was showing you earlier, the lower conscious mind. So you can see the concept of when we're born, they say we are knocked out. They say literally, when you look at a little child, at how innocent they are, how fun they are, it's so fun having children. And what's interesting about that is they say there's a mark that's beneath all of our noses, between the upper lip and, of course, the nose, is the mark of silence. Now, that's just one indication. They actually say that an angel ties the spirit, psyche, and soul to the embryo in mom's womb. And when we exit the womb and go into the air of the world and start drawing that first breath in, that's when time starts. That's what astrologers call, there's your birth chart, right? And they look at the ascendant, the sun and the moon and all the stuff and call you are your sun sign. But that's not true. What I think we are in is a reality machine here of conscious growth. And it's called by some the soul trap. And they say we keep on reincarnating back and forth in this loop of reincarnation. This is deep stuff, but it's something that I think awakens consciousness. And that is this: the lower conscious mind is what we would call our lower perception of reality. You can see over here, that's this little sphere right here, which is also known as the moon. And what's interesting, this is called the lower mind. Now, I apologize again for the crudeness of this drawing. I thought the thing would pick up a little better when I photographed it. But that's called also connected to the earth, which is the physical body. See, notice the lower physical mind and the physical body. This is the dense lower world. Well, that's what's shown in this very crude diagram right here. And again, I apologize. I'll get a better one next time. And then notice this is the moon here, connected to all the planets. And notice right up here, there's a word called Binya. This is Saturn. And these are the three lower levels of the lower consciousness, the spirit, and something they call the karmic entanglement into this realm. And this is deep stuff, but I can tell you many of the texts support this. And the very, very ancient text and very interesting. In fact, I put this up a little while ago. Dr. Emoto was an interesting guy who showed us that thoughts were actually things. Why? Because, and if I can find the other diagram here, it's buried under here somewhere. This is lake water before it was, altered in any way. And this next diagram, I know this is very small. That's lake water. And this is lake water after someone prayed over it. And I encourage you to look at Dr. Emoto's work. It's amazing. And what it proves is that thoughts are literally things. And this is you could say, analogy to the Jupiter chakra. There's not a scientist drawing breath that can tell us how consciousness gets into the body. The ancients actually told us it was through the third eye chakra, which is interestingly enough right here connected to the pineal gland. See, many ancient texts talk about the pineal gland, how it is like an antenna into the lower conscious perception of reality. Well, here's what's interesting. And this is what all your great texts talk about. The Atma Bodha, the Vedas, also a really good text for anybody who's familiar with this one called Sermon on the Mount. They all say the same thing. And once you get past the self-righteous dogma and just read them for what they are, they're amazing. They're absolutely stunning texts. And what it's telling us is that we have control over our thoughts and our reactions. So why am I going into all of this? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is exceedingly powerful on the lower conscious mind. And when you have an alignment with all these planets, things oftentimes might appear worse than they really are. The good news is this will pass. Now, astrologers have been commenting that this actual alignment happened last summer as well, but it didn't exactly conjunct. It was like within 13 minutes of arc. Astrologers use degrees and minutes. And it was very close, both in the sidereal and the tropical zodiac. But now it's coming to an exact conjunction. And it's going to happen, of course, right on February 20th. So, and it's not just February 20th. We've got all these alignments coming up that are exceedingly powerful. So where am I going with all this? We need to be maybe more, not that I'm here telling anybody what to do, but I've observed in my own consciousness, as well as other people, that we're very reactive right now. It can tend to feel like doom and gloom. Now, that's the negative side. The positive side of this, and many people will tell you this who study astrology, Neptune is not only confusion and delusion, it's spiritual awakening to another reality. I actually had a vision that we were going to have a potential nuclear war breakout or a pandemic breakout again, but that it would be intervened. Now, a lot of people have been talking about disclosure, right? We hear it all over the place right now. It's all over the internet. And I think that's going to be part of this Saturn-Neptune. So realities are going to shift in a lot of ways. And, everybody's reality is totally different. I always like to examine that. And many psychiatrists and psychologists talk about this. Everyone has their own perception of reality. If you talk to one person, their world is here. You talk to another person, their world is here. You see what I'm saying? Everyone is focused on what their perception of reality is in their world. And this is a very interesting thing to examine in psychology, because this Saturn-Neptune is going to really affect that. So it's really cool to look at yourself or reflect, if you will, because I think we're going to see the world get crazy. We always do on conjunctions and opposition, particularly. And this is a conjunction. And it's coupled with this Kalasarpa yoga. Now, by the way, I didn't mention this, but that Kalasarpa yoga, meaning all the planets except Pluto are going to be in between the nodes all the way up until July, the middle of July of 2026. And then what's interesting is in July, we have some really cool stuff happening. And I'll be talking more in detail about this. But we have a real interesting alignment going up. It's not an alignment. It's actually a series of aspects going on with the outer planets. We're going to have Jupiter trining Neptune, sextiling Uranus, and then Uranus is going to be sextiling Pluto. And all of this happens in an opposition to Jupiter, which is in its sign of exaltation at that time in the sidereal zodiac. So again, whether you look at this in tropical or sidereal, you're going to see different signs, but the aspects themselves are exceedingly powerful. And these are good aspects. So whatever happens here between now and July is going to be, I think, a really powerful sense of awakening, or kind of some aha moments on a global basis as well as individually. Now, everybody's at a different place. We listen to the news, you get crazy shootings and crazy stuff going on all the time. So the world is the soul cauldron. Everybody's not on the same place. But what's interesting is collectively, I think this is a very powerful time of growth and change. And every year everybody sets their New Year's resolutions, right? They're going to lose weight, they're going to do this, going to do that, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. I think hope and goal setting is the fabric of life. But this one could have a far more powerful effect because of these alignments that are coming up. And again, you look through different countries, like look at Europe right now. Europe is in really bad shape. Financially, the EU, there's been talk about dissolving it. I've been talking to different clients and also different people in various places about Europe. It's in a very precarious place. Australia as well. And what we hear in the news is often not the reality of what's really happening behind the scenes. And again, follow the money. George Carlin was right. Forget the politicians, you have owners. And not to get into that whole quagmire, but this is definitely going to encroach into many areas of our lives. Another thing I will say about 2026, a lot of doom and gloom right now about expenses and costs and tariffs and all this. I actually see on the spring equinox coming up, which we'll talk more about this later. The spring equinox actually shows that the effects of what's been happening here in the United States, at least, we're going to see the economy actually start to truly pick up. And I think a lot of things will shift from that point forward. I know Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, thinks he's going to see it in the first quarter. Well, he might not be wrong, but I really see it from the spring equinox forward. That's when things start shifting. And, there's a lot going on right now, and there always is in this world, and a lot of it we don't hear about. So this is a really powerful time. This Kalasarpa yoga is one I get. We do have to watch health a little bit. So a lot of people have been reporting flus that are very severe right now. And there's different variants that they say are around right now. And I'll tell you, I love oregano oil, which is Caraval. It has Caraval in it. And again, I can't give you medical advice, but I can tell you whenever I feel something, I love oregano. And you got to get the strong stuff, 80 to 90%, and you put it, if you want, into olive leaf extract with the polyolefin in it. It's amazing stuff. And a lot of people are flying right now. And sometimes you can get this in pill form too. You can just take it. And very powerful. It wipes stuff out. It's one of the stronger natural antibiotics, they say, ever known to man. So it's not, I don't want to give anybody advice because some people are on meds and stuff, and be careful. If you're on that, check with a doctor. But I would say, that knocks it out for me. And absolutely. And they say it kills parasites too. Isn't that interesting? But anyways, also another thing I want to talk about, and this is a parallel. Now look at the confluences that are coming up in February. Not only do we have these alignments and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, but in the Chinese New Year, it begins a fire horse year because they go on the animals in the 12-year cycles of Jupiter. So what's interesting about this is that I think it's February 17th, the Chinese New Year begins the fire horse, and we're moving from a snake year into a fire horse year. And there's a lot of analogies that kind of fit the Western astrology and Vedic astrology as well. And that is, it's the shedding of the skin of the snake now into a catapulting energy of the fire horse. For years I've heard crazy stories, even in China, where they would take girls who were born in a fire horse year and they just drowned them, because they felt they were too, rambunctious to be alive, right? Isn't that nice? Gives you a little idea what goes on over there. But anyhow, hopefully they're not still doing that. But it's interesting how I've noticed people who are fire horses. Camille's a fire horse. My son, Aiden, is a horse. He's not a fire horse. But interesting stuff, how you see there's a real, intensity to these people. Well, this is the year we're going into. And when you couple that also with the Kalasarpa yoga I was talking about and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's a catalyst for a lot of crazy stuff to be going on at the same time, where we move into a new reality. And I really believe we're going to see disclosure more and more extroverted. We're actually going to see it be talked about more and more. And it has been on mainstream media. And again, the movie The Age of Disclosure was a big step in that direction. And I think you're going to see a lot more on that. There's people coming forward in all walks of life, not just intelligence and military, but other walks of life, who are bringing evidence that's overwhelming. And, I was asked this about 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was on Coast or someplace, where they said, Jeff, do you think disclosure is imminent? I said, I think it's already happening. And I think it's going to happen even more now. And this Saturn-Neptune brings us into a whole new reality. There's an interesting, bunch of information. I don't want to get too deep into this because it gets way off the track. But, the Nazis were doing rituals to open up portals. And this is stuff that's been going on a lot. And there's books out there right now about the secret space programs. And this goes way down the rabbit hole. And there's other things talking about this child trafficking stuff that goes on. Yeah, they found a lot of them, but they may not find a lot of them. And there's some pretty hideous stuff going on. And this gets into the whole demonic angelic realms. This whole place is really a combination of good and evil. It really is. And it always has been. And when you think about it, it always has been. And I think we keep reincarnating here until the lower conscious mind becomes not only self-aware, but it expands, or like the, if you will, the cocoon, the caterpillar coming out of the cocoon, flies up back to the connections of the upper layers of the soul. And that's interesting because Saturn seems to be you could say, escape from Alcatraz energy that holds it. Look at his glyph. It's the cross over the crescent of the moon. Do you know that Saturn takes 29.5 years to go around the solar system approximately, catch back up to where it was? You know how long it takes the moon? 29.5 days to catch back up to the new moon. Isn't that interesting? And that's way beyond chance. And even though it may not be precisely that, but that's the numbers I've heard. And I also find, looking at progressions, the first 90 days or 100 days after a child is born plays out the next 90 or 100 years if we live that long, which we certainly should, but a lot of us don't. But interesting stuff. This is the lower soul trap of the mind until we release our emotional attachment to it. So one of the positive things I would say about this year coming up is look at your reality structures. Not that I'm here to tell anybody what to do, but I know I'm doing that. Look at your perception of reality and say, hey, am I looking at things in the best possible lights, or opening my mind up to many possibilities? Because it actually can be a really conscious, expanding time when the planet of structure meets the planet of, you could say, the portal to other realities. And I think, again, I'd mentioned many times, one of my favorite texts to talk about was the Magus of Strovolos. I mentioned this book a lot. That's certainly one. The Sharia Gilgum is another one I love, because that actually has the structures of the lower conscious mind. Once you can pass, the technicalities of it, and you absorb and let it wash over you into what it really means, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And the other book, just for people who say, well, I don't know if I believe in reincarnation and all that stuff, I always say, go read the book 30 Years Among the Dead. And the reason why, 30 Years Among the Dead, again, one of my favorite psychiatrists, Dr. Carl Wicklund, actually, in my opinion, proved we don't exit the body to nothingness. We go on. And there's so many ancient texts that prove that. Astrology proves that, especially Vedic astrology. And I got to tell you that in this book, he spent 30 years with his wife talking and releasing disincarnate souls, or ones that had come back to him. And he actually discovered this after he didn't believe in anything to do with this. He actually did shock therapy treatment on a person in a mental institution. And then that person who he dislodged came into his wife and told him, you're the guy shocking me with the lightning, which is, of course, the shock therapy treatment. And then shortly thereafter, he got talking and said, you couldn't have known all of this unless you were there. And he said, well, of course I was there. You were doing. Well, once he got the guy to realize that he must be deceased and that he was possessing his patient, he started looking, opening up his consciousness, and he saw mom, he saw other relatives or other people he was associated with that had died. And of course, he quote unquote went off into the light. And that's when Dr. Carl Wicklund got the aha moment and the light bulb came on, and he spent the next 30 years documenting. This is one of the most profound texts for any of the naysayers on reincarnation. Just read that. You can't make this stuff up. And again, I always mention the Magus of Strovolos. Why? That book is incredible. I don't care what your religious beliefs are. This will strengthen whatever religious belief you have, that we do not just die, so it's an amazing text. And some of the other texts I mentioned that he wrote was Esoteric Practices. And again, in this book, he spends very specific exercises on taking the lower conscious mind and learning to focus it with laser perfection. It's all about controlling your thoughts. And see, this is the interesting thing about astrology, is that I try and focus on this in readings, and that is, and in my own analysis too, is that we react to things differently when we see that there's something causing it, or influencing. It's the better word. You see, it's there. The astrology are portals into our perception of reality in time and space. I always say God created time so everything wouldn't happen at once, and it's really a matrix of release. And there are certain patterns we all are going to get throughout our lives, and then there's certain very, very unique progressions, transits, and doshas that no one else will experience the way you do. And this is really wild stuff. And it's so interesting to study this and then compare that to our psychological reaction. And again, why am I focusing on this? Because this is a year unlike, I think, any year we've seen in a long time. Last time Saturn and Neptune came to a conjunction in the first bound, again, the Egyptian bound of the first degree of Aries, was about 9,000 years ago from the best I can see. Some actually say it's longer than that. It's, to be in the exact position was almost 26,000 years. So, and we're really at a turning point, I think, in a lot of ways for a lot of people, not everybody, because remember, everybody's got their perception of reality. It could go down the rabbit hole the other way. It's all how you react. It's really interesting about that. So anyways, and you couple that again with a fire horse year and this Kalasarpa yoga. I find by, again, right around July, August, this is when these really good energies start, coming together. Also, we do have a Venus retrograde kicking in here, and I think that's right around October. And Venus retrograde was always cited by the ancient astrologers as a time of a lot of dissension. So this is a very dynamic year. And remember, in the United States, what is this? A midterm election year. So this is going to be a lot of musical chairs. A lot of people are retiring. The other thing I've been being asked about, in fact, I was on Mel Fabregas's show, and he was asking me this, is, Jeff, why hasn't there been any arrests here in the United States and all this stuff? Well, we're seeing the system is protecting itself. So I think that's another real strong possibility of a lot of things breaking out here on that front too. So this is, get your popcorn, your cotton candy, or whatever you like. And this is going to be a real I think, picture show here coming up. This is going to be a lot of stuff coming at us. And again, these alignments do that stuff, as well as that conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. And remember, again, you got Uranus going direct, stirring the pot, stirring the soul cauldron. So this is really powerful stuff. So anyways, yeah, a lot of people are making great comments here, and I don't really have a lot of time to dive into this, but the life after another world of hurt. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I always love that little cartoon. I mentioned that cartoon an awful lot. It was Mr. Wizard. I don't know if anybody remembers that one, but if you're a little bit older, you might. And of course, Mr. Wizard was when he sent him down the time tunnel, and he would incarnate on Earth, and he'd become whatever, doctor, fireman, whatever he did. And everything would get all screwed up, and he'd holler, Mr. Wizard, and he'd go twizzle, twazzle, tweezledum, or whatever he said, and brings him back here that you might remember.
Twistle, twazzle, twazzle, twirl. Time for this one to come home.
Well, isn't that interesting? It's not unlike maybe what happens when we're tied into the womb and the garment's prepared by the mother, and boom, we're knocked out and put into time and space. And I always love that little cartoon. It's got a lot of analogies. But, societies aren't perfect. I think the United States, its constitution and its attempt is about as good as we can get, as long as it doesn't get torn apart. Maybe it can get better, but if they open up free energy and everybody quit lying to us. But there's a lot of great stuff about the United States. And I got to say, this war between the globalists and the nationalists is likely to get much stronger this coming year. So let's see where it goes, because again, it's really a fight to make a one world government where you own nothing and you're happy, versus having autonomy and, of course, a capitalistic society. And many people will argue with me about that. Many people agree, but it's not where I'm at. I'm just saying this is the war I see that's always been going on here. And if you go back, I just watched the movie Ben-Hur yesterday. What a great movie. Love that movie. The one with Charlton Heston, just absolutely stunning. When you look at the drama and how people do things to each other, you look at the judicial system, where they're getting whipped on an oaring ship. And then you look at today's prison systems and all this stuff. I mean, really, we see a lot of justices and we see a heck of a lot of injustices going on in this world. And again, it's all our reaction to it. So this is a year that I think where we really get to tweak and adjust our reality systems. And hopefully it's a great growth and expansion for you. And I wish everybody definitely a good new year. And I wish I could answer a lot more of the questions, but someone here is saying, do you remember quantum loop? Yeah. Well, there you go. That's a good point to say. One thing, a couple of people have asked me about, and someone's saying here, do you think we'll see a government shutdown next February? It's really possible. Yeah. Especially with all the energies going on. I haven't directly addressed that. I could real quick here. Let me just cast a chart on that. Because, that was something I was going to mention. I'm glad you brought that up, whoever you are. Sorry, I'm not citing your name, but when I'm doing this and running all these programs, I got to keep my mind on it. I only got one mind. Anyhow, so the question was, will there be a government shutdown? So give me a minute here. So what I'm doing, I just type in what you asked. And that was a good question, because that was one I wanted to address. I looked at this once before. Let me look at it again now that it's fresh in my mind. If it does, it's not going to be as long as the last one, but it could. Yeah, it could, because they're going to throw some wrenches in here is what it shows. Yep. And again, this is an attempt to create chaos. Another thing people have been asking me about is anything going to happen with all this fraud that's been going on with the states and, of course, the welfare and other systems. And there's been videos circulating out there, where people are walking up in Minnesota and different states, talking to so-called childcare systems, and nobody's in there. So there's no children. 75 kids are supposed to be here. Nobody's here. And they wanted to enter their kids in, right? I don't know if you saw that video, but they're laundering this huge amount of money. And I watched on the news this morning about how government officials are saying, look, it's very hard for the states to be held accountable because all this money flows in from the government. I mean, look at the train from nowhere and what's going on here in California. In fact, that's another thing. California just had, I think it was Phillips 66 is walking away from one of the largest refineries in the country, $2 billion loss. They're walking out the door because of all the regulation. We could see gas prices in the land of the fruits and nuts here go to at least, $6 a gallon. It could hit $8, if something isn't done to stop that. So, I agree. There is free energy. I know I've seen it. I think there's hydrogen too, but I know that for a fact. And they've perfected it. Literally, we're able to perfect it right at the source of the engine. It's called dissemination. And there's also fusion going on too, where they're looking at burning boron. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. So we have the possibility coming up here to actually access free energy. And I think this might be some of what we see in the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, a myriad of realities starting to open up. And remember, when these conjunctions happen, it doesn't happen on the day that the conjunctions happen. That's you could say, the catalyst. And then it follows forward. Look at the effect COVID had on the world. It's still having the effect. COVID happened right on the tropical Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And can anybody say that their life hasn't changed from COVID? I mean, just look at your bank account. I mean, the cost that it increased, the restrictions, changed people's work lives, focused on the internet. The internet exploded from that point forward, as well as many other things. A lot of people lost their life during that too, for a number of reasons. I won't get into that one. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a time of reality shift. And I'd say welcome it, because we can't stop it. And remember my theory about looking at astrology. Remember, I was a skeptic of astrology or astronomy. And the only reason I got interested in it is because my mother pointed out to me that, look, what your experience is exactly in alignment with certain aspects that were happening. And I went, wow, you're right. And I find that when I do readings for people, everybody notices that, wow, you're right. This is right when this happened, that happened. Or why did you say my dad was this, or my mom, or whatever? It's in the chart. How could this be in the chart if you hadn't come here before, or your soul isn't connected to events that have happened before? Again, the earth is a time machine. It is literally, God created time, so everything would happen at once. And there's something about the earth that's like a grounding rod. Thoughts are literally things. That was something else I had here. I wanted to show you about consciousness and why your thoughts are so important. Just like Dr. Emoto, that diagram I showed you with the lake water. And that's just two pictures I just grabbed at random that I use. But if you study Dr. Emoto's book, he passed away now. I got to meet him in Tucson, really a nice guy. But he just said there are messages in water that prove thoughts exist, because human thought, collectively, our consciousness really matters. And it can go in any direction we want, for positive or negative. This is what created everything that humankind has created, was an idea first, then it got acted upon. This is why all causation is mental. I think that was mentioned in a really profound document called Sermon on the Mount. Check that document out sometime. Right on. And anyways, I want to show you this here. This is an experiment done by scientists back, I think it was in 1702. Let me find the right one. Yeah, it's this one right here. This is a physics experiment that was conducted in 1803. Actually, no, it was there was another. Yeah, this was another experiment was done right around 1703, and the one that I'm citing here was done in 1803. But they call it the Young experiment, where they had a slit observing matter. And then when someone observed the matter itself, meaning this is a picture of matter without observation or anyone observing it. And notice the change here, down here, that when someone recognized or paid attention to this phenomena. So this is kind of not a real definitive experiment. I think Dr. Emoto's stuff is better, only because you can't deny when you take lake water and, again, you freeze it and then analyze it under a microscope. I mean, he didn't just do this with lake water. He did this with all different types of prayers and chants and different psychological feelings that people had. Again, get his books, Messages in Water, if you want to see it. You can look at it online too. But you can't make this stuff up. So positive thoughts always come out looking like sacred geometry, negativity like gobbledygook. Now, that's rudimentary, but think about all the thoughts we carry every single day of the week. And this is interesting because they say the spirits love to influence our thoughts, and they do it to everybody. And they're very advanced. If you don't think I'm right about that, go check C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters. Absolutely a profound little book where he says the spirits actually influence people to go in certain directions one way or the other. And very, very fascinating stuff. So again, it's all about the mind. And I think the future is all about the mind, because that's the real frontier that we're all going to end up back into when we exit this body known as our physical self, right? Which isn't us. It's the vessel we're in. And another really cool diagram here, and this is actually what the Vedic astrologers call planets, graha. And graha actually means Caesar or grasper of the aura. I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This is truly the matrix. And I really believe that astrology interacts on all of us through this matrix called time. Many of the yogis in India will tell you, oh, the whole physical world's an illusion and time's an illusion. And I always kind of joke around and say, well, drop a brick on your foot and call me on the first of the month. It's really not an illusion. And yet they're right, because when we exit the body, which we all will sooner or later, that's when you find out how amazing the mind is. And if anyone's done astral travel or deep meditation and experiment with any of this stuff, that's the realm we go into when we exit this body. So powerful, powerful stuff. And again, I bring all this up because some people may find that this Saturn-Neptune conjunction may really open up a lot of very deep spiritual stuff in meditations, which is pretty cool stuff to look into. And as long as I think it was Teddy Roosevelt made an interesting comment. He said, keep your eye on the stars and your feet on the ground. That's an interesting comment for a U.S. president in the early 1900s to have made. Keep your eye on the stars and your feet on the ground. So, and again, there's been a lot of people in places of power who pay a lot more attention to astrology than we know. And again, I've mentioned before many times, look at Benjamin Franklin just as one. He's the guy who started what they call the poor farmer, or the Poor Richard's Almanac, which was known as the Farmer's Almanac. You can see that right there. So, and that was in the 1700s. And of course, now today it's the Farmer's Almanac, which is fine. But he was into a little bit more than just an almanac, and so were so many others. Many of the founding fathers of this country and of many other countries were too. And I know it's eerie how we see the timing of major events in the world happen with these major outer planet conjunctions like we've got coming up in February. And again, Uranus is just another, you could say, straw on the camel's back that's adding to this whole time of change. And they're never the same. Society's ebbs and flows constantly keep changing. And again, if you add the almost 26,000 year cycle, which is a cycle around the central sun, which is 25,700. Some people say no, it's 25,900, but that's a profound cycle that we all go through. And again, the soul may not know time in any way like we know it here in the lower conscious perception of reality. And I think to look at those diagrams that I always show with the lower conscious mind, the spirit, the karmic, you could say, escape from Alcatraz energy, which is kind of the Saturn, if you will, and then the wisdom of the soul and the upper divinity of the soul is really something to just let wash over you and realize that that's, really us, and we're blocked from it in so many ways. So I hope everybody has a good new year and has a good time, and be careful. Don't get nuts. I always say so many people get killed from drinking and drugs on New Year's. I don't go there. That's just not a good time. But anyhow, there's a lot better ways to celebrate it than that. But there's a lot of good comments here. I wish I could address all of them. Oh wow, someone's saying here, my son is schizophrenic, and he isn't convinced he has entities. That's an interesting viewpoint there. You might want to get. That's a great comment there. This is by somebody not. Nation Sand Portions. I don't know who you are, but that was, I'm sorry to hear your son has that. And, you might want to look into some of these therapists that do clearings, because a great book on that is it's called Freeing the Captives. It's by Dr. Louise Ireland Fry. You can find it right on the internet. She is a medical doctor, or was. She just passed away here about probably 7-8 years ago. Amazing lady. She got sick and tired of the allopathic descriptions of, what happens to schizophrenia and many other really deep, psychological problems. And she started becoming a regressionary therapist, and she would clear people. She would first get them under hypnosis, and someone else would start speaking. Well, who are you? Well, I'm John. What are you doing, John, in my patient's aura? She would say in one example. And he would say, well, we were shooting and I was out of ammunition. Next thing I know, I'm floating down this river, and now I'm in this place that's dark and, I can't get out. Well, John, you might be in my patient's aura, causing that patient's schizophrenia or massive depressions or other psychological difficulties. And that's not to say everybody who has that, but I've talked to so many psychiatrists who work in the prison systems, who work in various different government agencies, and they're shackled by the system that won't allow them to pursue that course of action. Again, read Dr. Carl Wickland's book, 30 years among the dead. He used shock therapy treatment, which, by the way, it's still used to this day because it literally shocks out of the body the disincarnate soul, or what we would call someone attached to someone's aura. And I know this has been also talked about with seizures. Another book that validates this impeccably well is Dr. Louise, no, not Louise, was it Dr. Edith Fiore? It's called The Unquiet Dead. So these are just a few books. They're on my website. You can go look them up on my website. And these are just a few books that talk about this stuff. And I got to tell you, I find that drugs and alcohol actually weaken the aura, and the entities have a much easier way to get in. I have actually sat in nightclubs and watched people, entities around them, and they're literally parasitically on the aura. And there's a lot of, they used to call alcohol spirits. I don't know why they stopped, because that's an interesting analogy there, where people really change. A lot of them like it because it brings that energy in. They get an alter ego, if you will. So yeah, I'm sorry to hear your son has that. You might want to look into clearing. I've done some of that work, and I find astrology is very useful. I actually pick a good astrological time to do the clearing of a person or a place. I'm very careful with that. I don't do as much as I used to because I sometimes get some barnacles on me, and it takes me several days to clear back off. And it's hard for me when I'm working so much. But it is something to look into. And you might find that, that's shed some really good insight on that. And there's a lot of people that I'm associated with that I could refer you to too if I couldn't do it. But I also find interrogation astrology is really good at looking at that. So yeah, that's pretty deep stuff. So a lot of political comments here. A lot of people are making some very good comments here. And all celestial roads lead to Tucson. That's an interesting comment. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people commenting here. So yeah. Yep, there's a lot of people who, this person's now saying that check out Veda Austin's work with water. You bet. And what's so important, and the telepathy tapes. Again, I had a podcast with Laura Hirsch. I'd like to get her back on. Laura Hirsch was the lady, wrote this incredible book with her son. He's quote unquote autistic, and I've mentioned this many times before, where he can talk to deceased relatives, can read his mother's mind, talks to the animals. And this isn't just something that's a theory. She's verified it. Like he's working at an equine center, and the horse told him that his best friend, another horse, died 6 months ago or whenever the time frame was. And his mother went and said, after he told his mother, through this device called spelling to speech. And then she went back to the equine center and said, was there a horse that used to be with the other? Oh yeah, the horse's name was such and such. Exactly what her son told her. And her son couldn't have known this. So we're finding through autistic children that maybe because they didn't develop the same way we did. See, our lower conscious mind is like a can that keeps getting kicked. You ever kick the can, especially an aluminum one, it gets dented and dented, and you keep running it down the road, and pretty soon it's smashed. Well, that's kind of how we feel sometimes in these lifetimes. Our lower conscious mind just keeps getting pummeled with all these, what we call belief systems and impressions, which are rightly called thought form elementals. This is what Dr. Emoto is recording. This is what these people are experimenting in these whole areas, Kirlian photography. They're all recording the impressions and energies that the auric field either has attached to it or is generating. Well, what's interesting is this gets into reincarnation. That's what keeps the loop going on, is as long as we're attached to all these feelings and reactive, the more, they say, the more you attach to anger and hate and all this stuff, the more you're likely to bind yourself back into reincarnation. And this is what all the great mystery schools taught. Again, Sermon on the Mount, Atma Bodha, the Vedas, the Upanishads. You can go on and on. There's so many ancient texts that talk about this. And they all basically say the same thing when you distill them down and get what's going on. It's our reaction to the world about us. Now, that's easy for me to say because I can jump off this podcast and have something irritate me or whatever. But we all have to step back and kind of be the driver of the lower conscious mind, if you will. And that's growth. That's growth. And that's really what an astrology reading should do. You should create growth. In fact, gemstones, I talk a lot about gemstones. And by the way, if anybody wants, I've got some really nice gemstones coming in right now that are untreated. Gemstones allow you to push back your auric field, you see, and open up so your conscious mind isn't so agitated. And in Vedic astrology, there's time lords called doshas that are attached. So this is really powerful stuff to look into. And I find that gemstones as well as conscious self-awareness, those coupled together really can have a big effect on you pushing back. It's kind of like Mr. Sulu put up the shields, right? And it's, remember the Starship Enterprise when you put up the shields and protect the ship. And that's how we got to kind of look at ourselves with our lower conscious mind, protect our reactionary energies with this. So yeah, there's a lot of people out there saying some really great comments. And I wish I could address every one of these as best as I can. And, so yeah, a lot of people saying here, we need to pray the children are taught peace and harmony. Yeah, I mean, you look at children, how pure they are. They're such little white sheets. They're so pleasant. That's why I love little kids. They're just so, in fact, we all have little kids inside of us. And, that's something to get more in touch with. As adults, we always tend to, be astute and have to have this, air that we put on that protects the ego. And what's interesting is there's a little boy and a little girl inside of every single one of us. And I always say, get in touch with that, because that little soul inside is really attached to the spirit and the upper elements of the soul. This world has been kicking us, like the can getting kicked in many different ways. And we get really bruised and we get really hardened. And you see this. There's some people that are really hard. Like I said, my first boss was a drill sergeant in World War II. That'll give you an idea how discipline went on that job. And he was actually a nice guy compared to my dad. So, but, this is the world we live in. It's really a world of good and evil. And it's so important to learn from children because they're so innocent and they're so precious. They haven't got a care in the world, especially that age bracket from about maybe 1.5 to like 7. They're just precious. They're just so precious. Not that they're not after that, but that's before the world has really kicked them in so much, And of course, there are unique situations, but in general, they're precious as can be. So really, really wild how to go back and try and find that inside of us. And then we become less reactive. The bills, the taxes, the lawsuits, everything else gets everybody. And it's designed, this world's designed, I think, to make you reactive and angry and, rebel. And you hear on the news all the time where people go off the deep end and they do crazy stuff. This crazy stuff we hear is insane. And there's no other words for it. It's insane. It's because we've lost our rational reference points, which is so important. And again, to the credit of many people in religions, that's what they talk about, and the great mystery schools. And, that's one ubiquitous thing that you find is releasing your, anger towards someone, which is oftentimes not easy to do. But anyways, I've got to run here. But I wish everyone a good new year. I probably will do a New Year's podcast. But, someone said, when will you do a session with Mel and Veritas? That's already coming out on the 1st. So we already recorded it. It's going to be coming out on the 1st of the year. So thanks for asking on that. Everybody's really making a lot of great comments here. I'm just trying to read a few here as I go along here. Yeah, somebody's mentioning I've done astral travel with practitioner in sleep. You bet, anybody can do that. Again, read the Magus of Strovolos esoteric practices and esoteric teachings. I put those up earlier. Really good books. These are a companion volume. By the way, you cannot get these anymore. You got to go to stoaseries.com. It's spelled STOA series, just like it sounds.com. And the website's actually defunct, but there's a link to get in to buy these books. So they're still available. And these are great books. Really like it. The Sharia Gilgum, too, I've heard, is not available as readily as it was. So I know you can still get it. I know if you jump online, Books might have it, so on and so forth. But, these are, I think what's good about these books is it kicks open the door of possibilities and it gets us thinking in this direction. And again, everything is thought. And when you open up to these things, you start really, there's an old saying, and I used to do forensics work, and I'd have a lot of guys in law enforcement tell me this. They say, you show me who you hang with or what you focus on, and that becomes your reality. Isn't that interesting? And there's so much truth to that. What you put your focus on. Notice if you buy a certain car with a certain color or a certain shirt or whatever it is you buy, you'll start noticing everything else like that. The lower conscious mind is very myopic. It's very centralized to what is in its immediate sphere of influence. So we have to surround ourselves with positive thoughts and also materials that make us focus on more positive things. So it's very, very important to do that. And that's a great New Year's resolution. And that's why I really enjoy going back and reading a lot of these books years later, because you pick up things that you didn't originally pick up when you first read them. So a lot of cool stuff. So anyways, yeah. Yep. Someone mentioning the Veritas interview. Yeah, that's coming up real soon on Mel's show on the 1st. So yeah, check it out. So wow, here's a lady who's a nurse. She says, I'm not, oh no, she's not a nurse. She says, I'm not a nurse, but I was with many who saw their relatives before passing. Yeah. Yeah, that's often the case. And it's interesting because no one dies, in my opinion. No one dies. Yeah, Veritas interview. I'm seeing another one here. So no one passes away. Again, some of these books are just a few of the books that validate this stuff. And I think we need that because we're always rationalizing in our mind, is something real, and when you read 30 Years Among the Dead, or you read the Magus of Strovolos or the Sharia Gilgum, the Sharia Gilgum is much more structured. It is a book that actually categorizes the layers of the soul and talks about things in a much more complex way, but it's really good. This is a really amazing book. I love this book. And again, the other one I mentioned a lot is this one. It's called Menot Yehuda by Rabbi Fatea. The chapter 88 is 200 pages long of lost souls who have stayed down in the lower earth sphere because of their attachment to their emotions and possessing other people. It's absolutely a stunning book. And these all dovetail into the same point, that consciousness is the key to escaping from Alcatraz. And they say a lot of souls will actually come back here. And just like Indiana Jones in the snake pit, they'll drop them a rope down and help them come up, you see? So, and again, we hear this as ascended masters or very advanced souls and angels helping certain souls. And that's interesting about the thought that Dr. Emoto proved thoughts are things. Well, there is something the religions call prayer or meditation, and they have a powerful effect. Even though we might not see a thunderclap or something happen instantly, it's really powerful. That was kind of the messages in Ben-Hur, too. A very interesting movie. So check it out. That's a classic movie. My God, I've never seen a movie. The more I get older and watch that movie, you see how epic that film was. Ben-Hur is absolutely stunning. So anyways, I'm going to get going here. And again, I'd love to keep going on here through these comments here. But yeah, so 2026 BBB IRS tax single exemption is now 16,000 more refunds next year. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into politics because a lot of people love Trump and a lot of people hate Trump. And I did look at Trump's chart, and I'll kind of finish with this. Trump has got some really powerful things going on. A lot of people said, Jesus, is going to get killed? I don't think so. I keep getting no. And, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, my personal opinion is what I see in the astrology, give this time. This is really going to turn, I think, this country into a place where the bankers lose the control. If you don't get the country generative, it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. And I don't think we realize how dangerous it is what has happened. We're north of $38 trillion in debt to bankers who print this out of the thin air. And I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I talked about it before, but I'm going to tell you, we are in a very precarious and dangerous situation with all of that. And this is what we're seeing with China, Russia, Venezuela, and Iran, the polarization of this financial situation with the BRICS nations and the Western financial system. Very dangerous. So I think the only way out is to become generative. Got to get the ship under its own power. And I think that's what's happening. It's interesting because Trump, the only danger I see with Trump is he's got a Neptune by solar arc direction opposing his sun. That's happening basically over the next year. So, but he's got a lot of other good things going on. He's also got a solar arc moon. These are called primary directions, trining his Mercury, which is very good. So even though he's got a challenging aspect, he's got one compensating that may really keep him very focused and on track. In 2027, the Kala Chakra Dasha, which is one of the most secret types of Vedic astrology, or more ancient, I should say, he moves into what we call a quantum jump in 2027 through October of 2028. Well, there we go. It's an election year. And I'm not going to get into too much right now, but I still maintain we're going to see a ball of yarn come unraveled with this whole thing with Russiagate, the elections and everything else. It ain't done. And the fact that Kash Patel is taking the FBI out of the Hoover building and putting it into the Reagan building without waiting for this new construction to be done is also a telltale sign that there is a lot of tentacles that are attached to this whole government that are being severed right now. Just give this time. I think change is going to be unprecedented, even though we've got the media and the talk show hosts pounding away, telling us what to believe, right? So we'll see what happens. And again, I don't want to get into this because I'll get hate mail, but my opinion is, even though it's going to be a really pivotal year that's going to shift this reality, we're heading in much better directions than we were. That's what I get. Yeah, that's right. Kash Patel just closed the Hoover building. I just got a text in from somebody, or a comment, and you're right, he did. They're moving it into the Reagan building. And I've heard all kinds of theories that there's so much subterfuge connected with, wiretapping and all that whole building. They don't even want to deal with it. They're just cutting the ties and jumping into a new one to get around that stuff. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on here. I think we're in one of the most unprecedented changes for the United States that we've ever seen. And, my heart goes out to everybody in Europe and other countries because, man, we are seeing some really powerful stuff go on in these other countries. And the European Union and NATO, this is going to be a very interesting thing to watch as this Saturn-Neptune thing happens, because in between now and July, very powerful time here. And, people have been saying, is the Ukraine-Russia thing going to resolve? I do think it's going to resolve. And it might be this crescendo here that's coming in here into January and February. I know there's a meeting with Netanyahu and also Zelensky at Mar-a-Lago. So there's going to have to be some serious concessions made. But I still say, if I could talk more freely, there is a whole bunch of secrets that we are not being told on any of the mainstream media that is going behind the scenes. You guess which door, number 1, number 2, or number 3. With this whole Russia-Ukraine thing. You look at the money laundering and the stuff that's been happening, it's absolutely colossal. If we only knew, huh? So, or we can only talk. So many blessings to everybody. Have a good new year. And remember, your mind is the most important thing. And with this Neptune-Saturn, your reality structures and the reality of this world is likely to really change in a way that hasn't happened in a long